we've made some progress, but when you think about any one of those announcements, I don't think that they fundamentally solve the core challenges that we have in making agentic commerce work. Like, I think every time one of these comes out, it's like, oh, we've solved the problem. But if you really start to dig down into the details of it, it's like, yeah, we solved, at OpenAI working with Etsy. Okay, that's interesting. But the big problems of like, how do you connect every retailer on the planet into this agentic commerce infrastructure? Like, we're just not that much closer to that objective.
Welcome to the Retailgentic podcast, where we explore the intersection of retail, e-commerce, and AI agents, which we call Retailgentic. Our mission is simple. We are shining a bright light on the new agentic AI shopping megatrend, which will disrupt the trillion-dollar digital retail market. The stakes are high. Google, OpenAI, Microsoft, Perplexity, Amazon, Apple, Meta, and Anthropic are all fighting to be the consumer AI shopping agent winner. There are going to be some tough decisions for online brands and retailers to make. What happens to checkout? How should payments work? Should you continue to invest in retail media networks? What does the world look like when over half of your traffic is not from humans, but from AI agents? These existential questions are the tip of the iceberg. On this podcast, we're talking to industry experts, analysts, and influencers to get answers to these questions, identify trends, and best practices. This is Retailgentic, your podcast partner in navigating our AI shopping agent future. And now here's your host, Scot Wingo.
Welcome to this episode of Retailgentic. My guest on this episode is Matt Nichols, General Partner at Commerce Ventures. If Matt's name sounds familiar, it's because this is his second appearance. He was previously on the show back in mid-June, and that episode has continued to be one of our most popular podcasts of the year. With only 6 months transpiring since he was on, that may be a relatively short time in typical industries, but here in AI, it feels like about 10 years. So we thought, given that it's been so long, it would be great to have him come on and share what he is talking about. In that time, we've seen a huge step function in activity around agentic commerce, payments, and much more, which are centered to Commerce Ventures' sweet spot. And as a GP at the firm that sits in the middle of this, so on one side, they have all the innovative startups that pitch them and ask for funding. And then on the other, their LPs or investors in their fund are Fortune 1000 companies that come from the retail world, e-commerce, payments, and financial services, as well as brands. So they see both sides of this marketplace. On one side, they see the supply, which is innovative startups and the different things they're working on. And on the other, they see the demand, which is these Fortune 1000 companies that are looking to partner, be customers, or invest in those different innovations. So in this episode, we cover a ton of topics, such as the 4 capabilities merchants need to add or enhance to prepare for agentic commerce. This is Commerce Ventures' framework that they've come up with that they share with those Fortune 1000s. Why a traditional Google feed mindset is not going to cut it in this agentic commerce world. And finally, we go over Matt's predictions for 2026 and beyond. We thought this would be a great end-of-the-year podcast for you heading into the holidays. So it acts like a bookmark, a bookend. So this is kind of going to be our capper for the holidays. This is going to be our last episode of the year. I know that's a little sad, but it's been a great year. This is, I think, our 33rd episode that we've put out. So we really appreciate everyone listening and sharing and rating and all the things you've been doing. We really appreciate that. And we thought we'd end the year on a bang. This is a doozy. I think you're going to really enjoy it. One housekeeping thing, in the podcast, we reference a Commerce Ventures presentation that came out in October. You can find that on the Retailgentic Substack that announced this podcast. That it'll be front and center, and that also it's in the show notes for the podcast. So in your favorite podcast listening device and technology, you should be able to find a link to this if you want to pull it up on your mobile. So we think you'll enjoy looking at those visualizations while you listen or afterwards. Don't do this when you're driving, of course. And I think it'll help explain some of these topics that they have to boil down at Commerce Ventures for these larger businesses on the LP side. So enjoy the podcast. We appreciate your listening. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and happy Agentic Commercing. Matt Nichols, welcome back to Retailgentic. Excited to have you.
Excited to be back.
Yep. So you were our third guest, I think, if I'm doing the math right. And it was way back on June 12th, which feels like 7 years ago now. I was going to say, you haven't aged a lot much since I saw you last, but it's only been 6 months.
I would hope not.
Yeah. That was our fourth episode. And here we are 6 months later. We're on episode 30. And so a lot has happened here in our world of agentic commerce since we last talked back in June. On that show, you predicted a lot of good things. So many of them have already come true. Isn't that crazy about this? Where we used to make e-commerce predictions and we had like 5 to 10 years to see how they gestated, but now they just kind of like pop right out. So I thought this would be a good episode to kind of end the year on. Also, I know venture capitalists out there in Silicon Valley tend to have big egos, but I thought I would feed yours a little bit. Your episode was one of our most popular. So, I don't ever get between the audience and what they want. So the audience wants more Matt, so we're going to give them more Matt. So I thought we could talk about a little bit of recapping what happened in 25, kind of from the lens of what you thought back in June. I think it's really interesting to kind of hear how investors think, and you're obviously big in the space, so you also think a bit like a retailer. So it's kind of a double win. And then we'll look at like next year and maybe even a little bit further out. Sound like a plan?
Let's do it.
Last time we went really deep in your background and Commerce Ventures, so maybe do the thumbnail version of Commerce Ventures, and then if people want more, they can go back to episode 4 and listen to the full story.
Sounds good. So Commerce Ventures, we're a venture capital firm based in San Francisco. Been around for about 12 years, investing out of our fifth fund, all focused on commerce tech, as you can imagine, given the name, which is really retail tech and fintech, or infrastructure for retail and financial services. My background, I've been in venture for 20-ish years, but took a 5-year hiatus where I actually ran a retailer. So I ran a direct-to-consumer e-commerce business in the jewelry space. And I think our thesis and our fund's focus almost maps up perfectly to all of the questions, problems that are happening around agentic commerce, right? It's a commerce infrastructure problem, it's a payments problem, and it's the sort of coalescing of those two things that makes this category, or this problem, question, opportunity really interesting. So it fits really well with our fund.
Share a little bit about, to the extent you can, about some of your LPs.
Yeah. So as a result of having that focus, we have some of the largest folks across retail and financial services. So we've got 2 of the top 10 retailers, 3 of the top 10 retailers in the US as LPs in our fund, across a couple different categories. And on the financial services side, we have some of the biggest payment processing companies, credit card companies, banks, and sort of financial intermediaries that you can imagine. So I think the combination of the insights that we get from those LPs, as well as the sets of retailers, brands, and folks in the financial services ecosystem that we talk to outside of our LP base, is sort of where we draw our inspiration for where we invest and where we try to use to help our companies.
Yeah, in my head, you're like a two-sided marketplace. So on one side, you've got all these large retailers and payment companies that are trying to figure out the world and looking to you. They've put dollars in your company to help them have a front row seat of what's going on the innovation side. And on the other one, you've got all these startups that want to benefit from your, not only your capital, but your knowledge about the space, and then also get connected to your LPs. So you get to kind of see both sides of the equation, which is pretty neat.
Exactly. And if we're doing it right, we're kind of being able to use one side to help drive value to the other, and vice versa.
So I imagine you've been very busy the last 6 months, because every retailer, brand, and PSP out there is trying to figure this out. And it went from, this is not a thing to this is a big thing. And it's been really interesting to see the, just from my little corner of the world, it's been quite frenetic and very exciting. I like this level. It reminds me of the very early days of marketplaces and e-commerce and selling on Amazon, and everything was just like very exciting and new and lots of activity.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. I think about our focus. Like fintech has always been a board level discussion at financial services companies for a long time. Like it's that important. And I think in the early days, retail was, right? In the early days of e-commerce, if I'm a physical retailer, what am I doing with e-commerce? But it's become, had up until this agentic commerce topic, it was important, and your infrastructure and who you're using, et cetera, was important, but it wasn't always as like board primary, like critically important. And I think what's so interesting about this cycle is that again has come back full circle to boards asking their CEOs and their CMOs, et cetera, about what they're doing about this topic, which has made it exciting for us for sure, and for our companies that are providing tech into those companies.
Since we've talked, we've had AP2 come out and 3 other payment protocols that I can't keep track of. MCP was out when we last chatted, but it's got it's become this. A lot of people are trying to build all kinds of things on it, maybe correctly, maybe incorrectly. And then there's these variants of it. There's like one that has a UX, and people are trying to jam a checkout in there. All kinds of stuff going on around MCP. We have. Let's see. ChatGPT obviously launched instant checkout and the corresponding ACP, which was pretty exciting. It was kind of rumored back in June, July, and then 9:30, I think it was, is when that dropped. That was crazy. And then we have Gemini making big moves, not only with Gemini 3, but prior to that, they had their shopping announcement, where they can go buy for you. And then now we had this kind of surprise PayPal Perplexity move where Perplexity just redid everything basically right before Cyber Monday and came out with a V2 of their old agentic thing. What kind of reflections do you have on all that activity?
I think so. I think it's fascinating because we've made some progress, but when you think about any one of those announcements, I don't think that they fundamentally solve the core challenges that we have in making agentic commerce work. Like, I think every time one of these comes out, it's like, oh, we've solved the problem. But if you really start to dig down into the details of it, it's like, yeah, we solved, at OpenAI working with Etsy. Okay, that's interesting. But the big problems of like, how do you connect every retailer on the planet into this agentic commerce infrastructure, like we're just not that much closer to that objective. I mean, I think so. Having some protocols is useful, right? That's the first step, but it's not the core big problem. So I think one of the things I'm thinking about is like our focus on what the big problems are and trying to find companies who are solving those problems hasn't changed all that much in spite of all of that activity, which I think is strange, honestly.
Yeah, it kind of helps define one side of the problem. So prior to this, there was all these like people that thought agents are going to talk to agents and this, that, and the other, and there's going to be all these other mechanisms in there. Now at least one endpoint. This has got enough momentum that ACP is going to be an endpoint for most retailers and be a priority.
And I think for me, like I think it will. I think it probably will be whether that emerges as the ultimate standard. I don't know, but again, I think the standard matters less than the infrastructure to implement the standard. That's the hardest part. Like the retailer side that will actually implement this standard. Again, it's easy for Shopify merchants and it's easy for call it the top 20 retailers. But if you really want to make this work for all of the merchants or nearly all the merchants, which is I think you almost have to make the consumer value prop be there or give them the confidence to buy. That's the big challenge that hasn't been solved. So I think about like where I think the big like opportunities and challenges are. I still bucket into 3 things we may have talked about in our last podcast, but I think it's retailers and brands trying to figure out how to bring AI magic to their sites to basically stop somewhat of the inevitable of people moving to ChatGPT or Perplexity. Like I think ultimately, if you can keep someone on your site, that's better. So how do you bring AI magic to your site to kind of obviate the need for all of this stuff? But then, acknowledging that some amount of your traffic is going to go be shopping for you through you using these AI platforms. It's really how do you get aggressive about using catalogs to get your product out there and visible by the AI platforms? And then ultimately, how do you enable these transactions to actually occur? And I think we haven't solved those last 2 yet.
So you guys put out a really good, I think you call it a newsletter, but it's how many pages is it? It's a 20-page PDF. So it's a light, it's not a mega deck. It's a tight deck that just, very straightforward. And I love the title. It's pretty simple. It basically says Agentic Commerce. So it's just Yeah, we're just gonna say what it is. And two slides I thought were really kind of topical to those were slide 11 and 12. And for those of you listening, I'll talk you through this. And if you're watching, this is incentive free to go over to YouTube if you want to see the slides. I found these. I think you guys put it on all your socials there for Commerce Ventures. I remember seeing it on LinkedIn, and then I believe someone saw it on X, but I'm sure it's on all the places.
And if anybody wants to get a copy of it, just hit me up at matt@commerce.vc. Happy to send it to you.
So, the title of the slide is From Static Feeds to Intelligent Transaction Ready Data. New feeds must help AI understand, recommend, and complete transactions seamlessly. And there's kind of two columns. There's the legacy Google Shopping feed column, and then there's the AI-centric feed. So walk us through some of the concepts on this, and what's the thinking behind your point of view of what's going on here?
I would start with what's the point of these two things, right? The point of the legacy shopping feed was effectively to populate a product detail page. That was for the most part what the goal was, or it matched up pretty precisely with that, which is honestly a limited amount of information that a consumer can consume on one page, which resulted in a relatively narrow feed. I think what's so fundamentally different about this, we call it the AI-centric feed, or feed that you might send to ChatGPT or Perplexity, is that one, you're no longer constrained by that, right? You don't know constrained by a single PDP and what could be shown on it. But probably more importantly is that in almost every case for them, more is better, right? More information about how your product could be used, more information about how the product was produced, more, any information that is available about the product can be delivered to answer a question that a consumer might have that you would never show to every consumer. So I think there's a fundamentally different need there. And I think that will result in data feeds that are, I don't know what the number is, here's what you think, Scott, but I mean, this could be 1 to 3 orders of magnitude more data points than the original shopping feed. It's just going to be so much bigger. And I think there's the size that's interesting. There's the, what types of data you could include in it. There's also this idea of maybe you even share things that are somewhat proprietary that you would never show to a consumer that might help these AI agents make a recommendation. For instance, on Nordstrom, how many of these sweaters did I sell last month? Right. And if you find a way that you can keep that confidential, et cetera, there's some interesting data points that would give the AI the sort of confidence to recommend that product versus one of your other products or a product of your competitor that I think is totally different than you would see in a Google Shopping feed.
I kind of liken it to Google Shopping feed is a dirt road. From here in the South, so we have a lot of dirt roads. And then what ChatGPT wants is a 20-lane kind of dual path highway, especially if you're going to do the instant checkout, because now you've got a whole another set of bi-directional things going on. So it is significantly orders of magnitude more complicated.
And I think you also, I think there's cases for some retailers that you don't want to share everything, right? It's proprietary, and I think which really makes the need for this even greater, because I think that retailers are going to effectively shut down the scraping of the site, or should shut down the scraping of their sites and replace it with a feed that they control, because trying to control what you block is way harder than creating this feed. So I think you'll see this move towards really blocking everything, but replacing it with something where you control the levers pretty precisely about who you're willing to give information to and when. And you kind of need that feed to be able to block it without going dark.
Yeah, two good examples are ChatGPT in the feed spec really wants a Q&A. So they want you to do some Q&A, and they want it to be real, so most sites don't have that. So we've been helping a lot of people figure out how to make that the real stuff. But then they also want some reviews. And that's where we're seeing a lot of retailers say, no, I think I'm going to draw the line there. Go get reviews somewhere else. But, the downside of that is if there's some rando on Reddit from 50 years ago that's really mad about, your jewelry company. We added this exact example where someone on Reddit, we were dealing with a large online jewelry company, and someone on Reddit had said, this is fake gold. And they just, because they're on Reddit, there's no transaction verification, and they can just say anything. And they went and responded, and it kind of helped. So at least when it was surfaced, if someone did the research, you could figure out that it was fake news. But who's going to go do that? So the downside of not providing reviews is you can't tell your side of the story. But that's that's a decision some retailers are making. They kind of view that review data as pretty proprietary, and they don't want to share it.
And I think ultimately, I also think there right now it's just let's just send the information. I think that there will also be an economic arrangement around feeds that we haven't gotten there yet. But like there are certain there are certain tiny little merchant retailers that might pay to have their feed ingested by ChatGPT. And there's probably really, really, really big merchants that could extract dollars from ChatGPT to get their feed. So like, it's not clear which way it goes, but I think there will be, because in every case you're not getting traffic back. I think there may be also an economic arrangement that spills out of what information you share. That is still too early for that, but I think that's a distinct possibility.
Yeah. So, for example, maybe ChatGPT says, well, you're currently at our rack rate is 5%, whatever it is, X%. And if you share some idea of sales rank, we'll knock a point or two off of that because the algorithm will get better. It'll make everything better. And yeah. Okay.
And then I think there's also this idea of, it'll be there's the generic feed. Here's all my products, but now here's the feed ranked, sorted, etc. for females between 30 and 45. Right. So there's a bunch of other things you can start to do, which go above and beyond just the characteristics of the products that I think I assume ChatGPT would love as well. And if you can find the way to do it, it could be really powerful.
And you don't really capture it here. The biggest area we have found that has the highest impact is you want to beef up the content, but it's the context that matters the most. And that's where these personas kind of start to matter, right? Because a good example is we had a beauty company we were working with, and our system got very aggressive about almost haranguing them. It kind of kept saying high priority, and we dug into it and could see why. That they needed scent profiles. So apparently, women shop by if anything has a scent, they have a set of scents they like and are kind of like in their boathouse, and then some they really don't like. So, for example, these are things like lavender, citrus. Some people are very strongly no scent; they have a bad reaction to scents, and so on and so forth. So it was really interesting to watch that play out because there had been a couple of proponents in the company that thought this should be on the PDP, and they kept getting vetoed. So they were very excited by this, and most of our customers take these things and just send it to ChatGPT. But this one was interesting because there became this internal, really interesting discussion of should we put this use case on the PDP, which is this kind of hallowed ground and harder to get information on. But what's happened is because we've streamlined the PDPs for this keyword world we live in, and the fact consumers have such a short attention span, it's created the opposite of what the LMs want and need. So none of that use case stuff is really on there anymore. Many times you'll have an ingredient list or like some really kind of specs kind of thing in a tab somewhere, which the LM likes. And then you'll have some content, like this sweater's blue and made of leather or whatever. And but then you're missing the usage of it. And sometimes it will be captured in images. So they'll show someone wearing this outfit. It's athleisure, so they'll show them at the gym or playing tennis or something. But the listing doesn't say that, and the LM's not processing those images. It could, but they don't use tokens on that. So there's this context piece missing, which is really interesting. So we're trying to help folks figure out how do you really beef it up and talk about that.
Yep, exactly. And to your point, yeah, people used to think about this PDP, to your point about the scarcity of it. Like you can only put so many data points, and you got to just change that mentality. Whereas there isn't necessarily a scarcity in this.
Yeah, you could send in this feed. It's actually infinite. You could send 80 pages of stuff if you wanted to, and why not? Okay, and then here on slide 12. So you guys have kind of 4 key capabilities needed for AI-enabled transactions, and they are. I'll start over at the right and work our way around clockwise. So API integration, agent authentication, payment infrastructure, and SKU-level identifiers. And full disclosure, you have Refi Buy on there, so we appreciate that. You guys, I should have mentioned this at the top, you guys are an investor, a small investor, which we appreciate as well. Yeah, so where are we? Give us an update on where we are on these 4 buckets, and what are you seeing that's interesting there?
So, and I usually start with the SKU-level identifiers. So I think it's kind of in terms of my thinking of the full wheel, I usually start there. I think this is an area that I think is very much underappreciated. Um, Today there's a bunch of players that are trying to agentically check out using an agent through a consumer facing e-commerce site, right? Add to cart, create this order, et cetera, match it with payments. And there is a crazy high rate of failure for a bunch of different reasons. Most people have thought about bot detection and fraud, but there's also just an incredibly high failure of actually being able to add the right product to the cart. And the reason for that is that even if you know that I want a specific Nike shoe in size 12 in blue, the ability to actually successfully add that to cart by traversing Nike's website is not that precise or not that definitive. And so I think our view is that what the world really needs to make the checkout part of the agentic commerce experience work is some like SKU, call it a global SKU that identifies what this product is across Nordstrom and Nike.com and all of these different sites. The same shoe across multiple sites. So that will have a specific SKU that then, ChatGPT can coalesce all the information about that shoe to recommend that shoe versus an Adidas shoe, for instance. But what's also necessary, which people aren't talking about, I think, is mapping that SKU to the individual SKU identifier that Nordstrom thinks about in their backend or Nike thinks about in their backend that would actually systematically 100% of the time allow you to add the exact right SKU in the right color, in the right permutation to cart without that some like agent making some decisions. And I think we're missing that. And I think part of the value of sort of the SKU um, sort of sending these like data feeds out there is in addition to being used for discovery, also being an identifier in that feed that enables a transaction once that consumer ultimately decides to buy that shoe or that perfume. And I think people aren't talking about that. People don't realize that it just doesn't work well enough. So like that's where like my head is on this sort of SKU level identifiers that I think we need to make the transactions work.
Yeah, we saw this in the Channelvisor days. These new systems are not good at canonicalization. And part of canonicalization is taking all this data coming in, canonicalizing it, mapping it, matching it, and then taking the union of it creates if you have a two-dimensional variant structure, it creates a really complicated matrix of what's available across those two, so call it size, color, the two most popular. And ChatGPT is struggling with that right now. You can they've turned it on and off, and we can watch them fiddle with it on the user interface, and we kind of can infer what's going on there. So it's been really interesting to watch that. And then some of the partners, like Walmart, tends to have a lot of the products turned off that have variants because I don't think they like the experience. Again, I'm reading tea leaves on all this, so that hasn't even gotten to the part you're talking about. Like then once you solve that, then you've got to get it downstream in the order correct. And so they're still working on that real time while this thing's in the air and they're changing wings and stuff, right?
Exactly. And that actually fits really well into the API integration, right? So we have a strong view that if you want this agentic commerce transaction to happen, i.e. a purchase that you make for a pair of shoes on ChatGPT and the merchant of record is, Nordstrom or Nike, we have a strong point of view that transaction needs to be done with an API and not some agent trying to traverse a consumer website, right? For all the reasons I just discussed, I think it's just too hard to have the speed and the precision necessary to do that agentic version versus an API. The challenge is we don't really have the infrastructure today to take a merchant level SKU and just add it to cart and make that work 100% of the time. So we're missing this kind of receptacle or thing that sits next to on top of how we describe it, the e-commerce system of record that can take an agentic transaction. And so I think again, Shopify works pretty well because every Shopify cart is the same. But for everybody else, even various different versions of Commerce Cloud checkouts are going to be different. I think you need a new piece of technology. And as we think about the ecosystem of startups that are going after this, I would say like there's sort of two fundamental different approaches people have taken. One is like called the API or bust. Like we're just going to build the API and we're going to go sell this thing because we're clear that that's the end solution. And then there's like the fake it till you make it, which is a bunch of players that are saying, look, yes, we either believe or don't believe the API is the right solution. But to get there and to have a broad catalog of merchants, we've decided to use this agentic flow, like just like hack it and try to use agents to flow through a consumer website to have a broad set of merchants, because you don't effectively need the merchant to sign on to saying yes to that approach. So I think the jury's out on what the right, even if you believe that the API is the end solution, should you start with a fake to make a bunch of merchants available on your platform through this thing that works 70% of the time? Or do you just need to go door to door and sell its API? I think it's to be determined, but I think it's a really interesting category that needs to be solved for the transaction piece of this ecosystem to work.
Are you doing this for fraud or?
There's a couple different things. So today, agent authentication is important for what I just described, right? You have to like identify that there's an agent that's trying to use your consumer facing site to purchase a transaction and somehow like allow that to happen. So like even in the fake to make approach, you like there needs to be some technology, whether it's working with the fraud prevention, something like a forwarder, et cetera, to enable that to happen. So they're like, we'll have to figure that out. There's also agent identification for the scanning of your catalog. Who should you let scan your catalog or not? But I think even in the long term, even if you have an API to take the order, you've got to determine, is this a legitimate agent and a legitimate consumer to be able to take the order from? So, and which relates to charge back and who owns it. So I think there's a bunch of necessary tech there. We're probably spending a little bit less time here in that like some of these fundamental building blocks need to be built first before this becomes super important, but it will become important at some point.
And you're not including in here. So I've talked to, we had Human on the pod, and then I know the Forder guys.
Forder. So we're invested in Forder. So yeah, yes, we've talked to them a lot about it. Yeah,
they're more like infrastructure layer though, and then this is more like maybe baked into the agent, some encryption, agent to agent encryption, which is like not in their wheelhouse. Or are you including that in the whole stack of this?
We've actually had a little bit of debate about should we put Forder in this category or not. Because I think what Forder does is it like identifies the real human making a purchase and that they are like, it's not fraud, and this breaks some of that. So they're partnering with and working with some other folks to go figure out how you change that relationship. But you'll need to, because like ultimately most of the fraud players were designed to block these sorts of transactions. So we just need this full scale change or like opening up, whitelisting, et cetera, to make this possible. And then the last is like the payment infrastructure. I think our view is that weirdly a lot of the payment infrastructure tech is already out there. We already have tokens. Like the fintech side of things is farther along than I think the commerce infrastructure pieces are. We're trying to figure out how we assemble them, but we have the fundamental building blocks there. I think the payment processing isn't going to change fundamentally. Do I think we're going to use stable coins or something? I'm not totally sure we will. I think it'll look a little bit more like the current payment processing ecosystem. We will have to figure out a couple things. One is like the chargeback and liability. Who's on the hook? It's not really a technical problem. It's more of a business problem about if there is fraud or issues with the transaction, who's going to be on the hook for it. And then I think there's also this like battle over the wallet. Who is going to own the consumer's wallet for these agentic transactions? Obviously, ChatGPT, Perplexity, they all want to create their own wallets. They're using folks like they're using big players to build these wallets. I think all of the merchants probably don't want these transactions to be used by ChatGPT's wallet. They'd rather use it their own. So I think we'll have this battle about who gets to own the wallet and ultimately who owns the customer. But the technology is actually pretty far along. Companies like VGS are doing some of this stuff, but it's more of a business decision question than it is brand new fundamental infrastructure.
Any other slides you wanted to hit in the presentation? I think those are the two.
No, those are the two that I think worth chatting here. We've got a bunch more, but happy to chat with other folks offline. But yeah.
You have all these meetings with payment companies and retailers and brands. What's top of mind with them? I mean, obviously I think this presentation is a reflection of some of that, but anything above and beyond that we haven't talked about?
I think I talked about it a little bit earlier, which is like, there's the three things I talked about, right? Which is bring AI goodness to your site. So like we strongly think people need to do that. And there's some really cool companies that are doing like building that, bring some of that like AI conversational stuff to their sites. The second is just getting a feed up and running to give you the levers you need to be able to send this data out to the AI platforms. Almost regardless of how much you want to send, a lot or a little, you got to have these levers. So that's probably, those two are like top of mind. I would say we're a little bit less like, I think the retailers probably have to think less about this transactional thing. I think they're going to be recipients of how this plays out. It's so early that I think focusing on that today from a retail perspective is probably a little early, but just being aware of what's out there. So it's probably the first two of those three categories that I mentioned earlier are where we've recommended that our sort of retailer friends really focus their time.
What do you think about the whole Google versus OpenAI battle? You're kind of, I went on a trip. Actually, I saw you when I was there. It was a while ago. It was like, what was that, August? And every visible surface had an AI promotion on it. It was like, yeah, it made me, I didn't think we were in a bubble until I went out to Silicon Valley. I'm like, we're in a bubble. And there's even like billboards for companies saying, are you a YC company? We have this infrastructure layer for you. And it was like, whoa, we're like, the bubbles are nested 6 layers down. Maybe let's start there. Do you think we're in a bubble?
I mean, I think we always go through the cycle, right, where everybody gets very excited about it. There's bust boom, and I think we will have some of that, which is a lot of stuff that we hope would work out won't. But I think this is fundamentally real, right? I think you look at the consumer activity is there. I think the promise of what this agentic commerce stuff could look like is there. I think I'm probably more on the bullish side of things. I mean, a lot of people are saying, "Hey, this is great, but it'll work for reordering your toilet paper, but not for buying a sweater." I'm actually more optimistic than that. I think we will move really quickly into this agentic commerce experience feeling much more emotional and less just pure chat based, which I think opens up the market. But I think a lot of this, like, there's so many players going after this market. The opportunity is so big, it will burst a little bit. But I think it's a long-term trend that is worth investing against.
Yeah, there's no GPUs sitting idle right now, unlike dark fiber that was obviously dark. It's in the name. That's always Jensen's answer, which I think is a pretty good one. It's definitely, if it's a bubble, it's not like the internet bubble. It's definitely different.
It would be a different bubble. It could be,
yeah,
but it's definitely not the same dynamic as
the thing.
2000.
I guess one definition of a bubble they always talk about on CNBC is you don't know you're in it. So you almost have to say it's not a bubble, because, well, I guess if you say it is a bubble, then you're not in one. I don't know. I don't understand there's some not a philosophy major. The logic breaks my head on that one. What surprised you the most this year since we've chatted? Like, what's something you're like, holy cow, didn't see that coming?
Honestly, it's what I talked about earlier. It's honestly it's not the thing that happened, but it's the reaction to the thing. Like how people have continued to see these new announcements and think that they are fundamentally moving us forward. Like I feel like every announcement is huge, and everybody gets, oh, like why would you bother focusing on this thing and going to invest in this company because so and so has solved the problem. And it's just like it keeps happening, and it's just surprising to me that keeps happening. It's probably my biggest, the thing that has surprised me the most, honestly.
And you think that's because they don't understand the back end part of our world, that there's all this complexity that you've surfaced on that one slide?
I think that is the case. I think that if you haven't lived in e-commerce or built an e-commerce site, particularly from scratch, I think you just assume some of this stuff works a lot better than it actually does, or that it's a lot simpler than it actually is. And it's like part of why I think people are like, oh, is ACP going to solve the problem? Like, no, it won't solve the problem. It's a part of the solution, or it could be part of the solution. It's the standard, but it doesn't solve the plumbing issue, like, which is the hard stuff about making all this, like making ACP actually work on the merchant side. So I think it's just people who, like, if you don't know the complexity of how merchants work, I think you underestimate or overestimate how these new announcements can solve the fundamental problem.
Let's say you decided that this VC gig was getting old, all the fun meetings and free lunches and everything, whatever benefits you enjoy. And you decide to go operate a jewelry store, like you get back in the biz. What would you be doing, like as an operator? Like, put on your operator hat. Like what
Yeah, I mean, I would be getting very aggressive on feed management, right? Just like, how do I test every single possible thing that I know about my products? Questions that I could have the question to and the answer, and just like flood the internet. Like, I was my jewelry business was the benefit, honestly, was almost like exclusive, not exclusively, was largely driven off of SEO because we own the long tail of jewelry search. Like, we just owned it because we created every single permutation and combination because we had this crazy e-commerce infrastructure that allowed us to, we built it ourselves that allowed us to do that. And I think that served us for many, many years to grow, to build this online footprint in the old SEO world. And I think there's this opportunity today to build that same online footprint in the GEO world, specifically to individual products. So like, this is not the kind of GEO, I'm just going to make my SaaS company show up for a bunch of queries that are relevant. It's like, how do you make a catalog at scale? Each of the individual products in the catalog show up as relevant and interesting to ChatGPT. I think that's where like the biggest opportunity is.
Yeah, I was talking. We end up talking to a lot of CPG companies, even though it's like not really our target zone. And my advice is flood the zone, and like just what you just said. And they're like, yeah, but we're Walmart and Amazon will do that for us, or our retail partners and Target. Let's just say the big three for that, and maybe Kroger or something. And I was like, Amazon and Kroger are blocking all the bots. Target is just doing this app thing, and you don't want one of those. They may be great retail partners and everything, but they're not going to take the effort for every product they have and add all these important elements. They don't know your product as well as you do, and you need to control your own product description destiny by having every site. Every one of these CPGs has a website, and it may not have transactions, but it's being scraped by ChatGPT. Use that. You've got this almost ready fire hose to put in there, and you can even send a feed. Like, ChatGPT doesn't have to have transactional data with this; they just want product data.
And I think, I mean, honestly, go back to my jewelry days. We did that too. We were at the beginning. We were a very small brand, but because no one had content or products across this long tail of thing, like, we were the answer. We were the only one left. We were the only one there. So I think the same thing is available here. If like, if you can put out content that is answering the question that some user is asking on ChatGPT, if no one else has the answer, they're going to probably use yours, regardless of who you are. So
And if you're a incumbent, a challenger is going to do it, because I bet you displaced K Jewelry or something.
exactly, there's no fundamental advantage you have as the incumbent here yet, right? Like, because if it's all white space, they're going to take it from anybody, and they don't care whether it's P&G or some brand no one's ever heard of. Like, just, you need to find that real estate or occupy that real estate, regardless of who you are.
All right, that's a good recap of all the 2025 things. Let's look forward, and I know it's hard to predict. We just the last 6 months were so crazy. Let's look at next year. Do you have any predictions? What's Matt's crystal ball telling?
I think we will start to. If you ask a retailer today how much traffic or like influence they're getting from ChatGPT or AI in general, I think the answer that I have heard is it's small, kind of more than I thought, but like still small. I think we're going to see that change dramatically. I think whether it's actual traffic that is delivered by ChatGPT or influenced through or purchases that are happening, like, I think we're just going to see that number spike way faster than even those CMOs think it will. Right. Regardless of whether that turns into actual like agentic transactions, that'll take some time. But I think the pace at which this happens is going to surprise people, honestly.
Yeah, and there's a pull, which is like, here's this big audience set using these things, but then the push is as Google reacts to all this, they're sending less clicks downstream. So everyone's SEO traffic. Like, if you were running the jewelry business, you would be running around with your hair on fire because, yeah, people that have lived on SEO are dying on SEO right now, and it is very scary to watch that go down into the right very quickly.
And I think part of it is like, because it's exacerbated because Google has shown their willingness to cannibalize their core search business, right? If they were holding their ground and be like, oh, this whole AI thing probably won't play out, it would actually slow the thing down. But the fact that they're leaning into it smartly, I think, like, they're just going to accelerate the thing because they're not forcing users to change even the destination they go to switch from kind of blue link searching to AI searching. It's just happening.
That's a good prompt because there's 4 companies that are sitting it out, and the biggest notable one is Apple not doing anything, and then you've got Grok, Anthropic. Anthropic's kind of really focused on coding and really into that vertical, and maybe even B2B enterprise agents. And then we have Meta, who's like lost in the jungle, kind of spending their Zuck bucks on. I haven't been fortunate enough to have any rain on me. So, uh, raining Zuck bucks on people that can build models. Do you think in 26 we see one of those guys kind of get into the agentic commerce ring, or you think they're going to go do other stuff?
I don't know if 26 is the right year. It could be. I mean, I think the obvious one is Apple. I mean, one, because they just have, I mean, they've got Siri, they've got the endpoints. Like, and honestly, in almost every category, they've been super happy just weighing it out for someone to try some newfangled thing and then they do it right. So I would be surprised if they don't figure this thing out, honestly, and build a really compelling sort of like a much more elegant consumer friendly version of ChatGPT, whether it's using Siri or using something else that gets a whole new set of customers in the door because it's integrated into their phones. So I think they're probably the ones that have the biggest opportunity to do something. And I think will. I just don't know how long they're going to wait.
Since we talked, I think when we originally talked, there was like 3 or 4 vertical agents, which are ones usually focused on one category. The most famous is Daydream, and then now there's Gensmo. I think I'm saying that right. And a couple. I think you probably know. Is it Arcade? Is that the jewelry one where you can do custom jewelry? That's probably near and dear to your heart. I don't know if you've played with that one or not. Yeah. What do you think about that category? Is that you guys don't really invest in consumer facing stuff, right?
We don't invest in consumer ones. Like I would say in this case, I've had some pretty strong opinions over this conversation. In this one, I have a modestly high conviction opinion. I am more optimistic on the horizontal models winning than the vertical models. Um, Reason being a couple of things. One, I think just the volume, the amount of dollars they are spending to get better at this is just like dwarfs all of the vertical guys. The second is I think they have been successful at getting you and me and all of us to put all of our queries through one platform, and the ability to mine that data to make vertically specific queries really relevant, I think will be high, will increase over time. So they'll have this like data advantage. And the third thing is like if you think back about why vertical, one of the reasons why vertical search and e-commerce existed was it required specific inputs to get at the thing that you were looking for. Travel is a great example, right? The interface for travel sites is like, when's the date you're leaving? When's the date you're arriving and leaving? Um, how many people in your party? All these different things, which requires sort of a very industry specific set of inputs. In a world where the inputs are more textual based, you kind of don't need that. Maybe you want it, but you don't really need it. So I think there's this opportunity to not be forced down a path of creating a very vertically specific set of inputs or results. So I think in the long term, I'm bullish on the horizontal guys. It's possible in the short term that the vertical guys have a better, more exciting user interface. And I think they are today. But I think ultimately, you think about shopping for sweaters on ChatGPT in 3 years. I think it's going to feel a lot less like a chatbot and text in, text out, and a lot more like talking to a Shopify site, right? Or multi-merchant Shopify site is probably the way to think about it. So I think it's just going to get better in ways that people aren't totally thinking about.
All right, let's cast your magic crystal ball out a little further. So PayPal CEO has said that by 2030, 25% of e-commerce will be agentic commerce. And I've seen Morgan Stanley said 20% kind of on their bull case. And then another way to look at it is there's a set of Wall Street people, mostly Bernstein, and then Morgan Stanley also opined on this, where e-commerce is growing 5 to 7%, depending on which numbers and which categories you're looking at, but basically a point or two above retail overall. And their bull case is that by 2030 that really accelerates, maybe like 3 to 4%, or which would be, is that thousands of basis points? I think it is. Yep. So 3 to 4,000 basis points. What any of those predictions feel right, wrong, low to you?
I would say on the PayPal one, so the 25% of transactions being agentic commerce, I think if you were talking about agentically influenced commerce, so inclusive of people finding some sweater or some car part on ChatGPT and then navigating to the car part seller or the e-commerce merchant and buying in the traditional way, then that number feels right. It's still up, still it's a huge number, but I think that could be right. If you're really talking about purchases made on ChatGPT where the consumer never made it to the end merchant, seems high. As bullish as I am on that, like that would just be incredibly high. Um, so, but it's still, even if you get to 10%, it'd still be huge. So I don't think you need to be that big. But so I think, yeah, influence probably all right. And then the Morgan Stanley number, I think it's optimistic. I think if you assume that, it's basically you're assuming either overall retail is going to grow faster, right? Which seems hard to believe that there's that much unfulfilled demand that like just literally changing the way that people buy will influence the growth rate that much. Or it's a shift from offline retail to online retail for the same reason. Either way, I think the fundamental shift is not going to be between agentic commerce driving more transactions overall or agentic commerce pulling transactions away from physical retail. I think it's agentic commerce pulling away share from other ways that you buy online. So I don't think it fundamentally changes the overall growth rate of e-commerce. I think what it does is like more and more of e-commerce will be agentic. If that makes sense. Which is still a huge shift. I just don't think it changes the growth rate of e-commerce volume all that much.
All right. We have you on the record. We'll check back next year and see how you did.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Appreciate the time. I want to make sure you have time to get to your next meeting and really appreciate you coming back on to share your thoughts. It's always, you sit at this epicenter of things, and it's always great to hear what you're seeing out there.
Yeah. Love to be on. Love the conversation. Great questions and always fun to riff on stuff. So thanks, Scott.
All right. Have a great holiday, and we'll talk to you next year.
Follow, rate, and share to stay up to date with Retailgentic, your guide to the future of AI shopping agents.